Okay, well, thanks for coming. Again, finding this room, which I've had trouble with both days. Okay, I would go up the wrong tower and they'd say, go through the auditorium and the secret passage.
Yes.
Okay, so I have business, I think I have enough business cards for everybody here. I had misplaced them yesterday. But on your way out, if you want a card, please take one. And I have time to talk after our session today because this will be my last thing. But there's my information, but I'll have the cards. But I want to talk about cool tricks in Excel. We did a course for Microsoft Finance for about 8 or 9 years. Neat things in Excel, and it would be a 4-hour class, so I can't do everything in 45 minutes. But I think we'll do a lot of really neat things that will help you if you use Excel in your job. Because, I mean, how many people watch the Food Channel? I always start with something. So, okay, so the Food Channel, you got to be good with and I like Pioneer Woman. It's going to cost me 5 years of my life by eating everything she makes. It's so good at Ina Garten. Okay, but my wife read the history of the Food Channel. There's a book on the history of the Food Channel if you want to read about it. It's very interesting. Okay, but basically what does that have to do with Excel? Well, the Food Channel is how you can put those ingredients together to make the perfect meal. So, I mean, what is the key to being good at Excel? Knowing all the functions. And I can't do them all in 45 minutes. But like a quick survey, how many people have used OFFSET? A couple. Indirect? A couple. Okay, but those are like sort of the most advanced functions that even if you use them, maybe I can show you something new about them. Get pivot data, how many people have used that one? Okay, but those are sort of the more advanced or lesser known functions, but people need to know those. I mean, if you're given a problem, the key to Excel is not just knowing the functions, but knowing how to combine them. And I can't do that in 45 minutes, obviously. But I think most people in the room here, from the hands going up, that's a much higher percentage than when I go to teach at the Navy, and I think I'm going to get to go to Facebook, which I'm very excited about, to train their finance people on Excel. It's a much higher percentage in this room that knew OFFSET and indirect. I mean, if I taught the Navy or even at Microsoft, the people I would teach, maybe 10% would know OFFSET and indirect, so that's very good. But hopefully you'll know those things when we're done. But we're going to start with something called the Excel table feature, not data tables. How many people use fairly often Control-T to make it a table? Okay, fewer hands go up. But I think, and again, if you have people working under you or colleagues at your company, Control-T can save you a ton of time. So this started in Excel 2007, so I'm sure everybody in the room has Excel that would work with this. That's 9 years ago. Okay, so let's take, what's a problem we all face in Excel? We add new data and we struggle. What formulas do we need to change to update for the new data? How do we make the charts update? Okay, so for 3M, I had a guy, he created 50 charts at the end of each month, and basically he had to change the range on each chart, and did that 50 times. Make your data a table, you never have to do it. Okay, so it's just Control-T, you make data a table, and basically all your formulas and charts will update automatically, and I can show you something really neat that was added with 2013. So I have a very simple example. I like Gabrielle Leva Longoria from Desperate Housewives show, she's in there. Okay, so let's make this, so what happens when you make something a table? You select it and you do Control-T. Control-T makes, now do you see it says create table, my table has headers? Okay, so I click OK. Now notice that it looks like it's got a format. And doesn't it annoy you when you have a pretty format that when you add new data, the format doesn't update it and get included? Make it a table, all your formats will update, your conditional format and stuff like that. Okay, so I made this a table, and if you notice when I go, keep an eye right here. When I go in the table, do you see it says Design tab? So that means basically I can modify things. I can change the name of this table. So I could change the format. So, well, I could say make it match my shoes, I'm going to make it purple, I don't care. That doesn't match anything. Okay, but let's call it sales. So I change the name sales. Okay, so now let's suppose I want to add up the revenue. So I do equals sum, left paren, and now I go down here and I highlight and I select that range. Now, if you haven't used a table, you probably are blown away by this. It says in the sales table, add up the revenue column. Now, that means if I add a new person to the list here, then basically that new person's revenue will be included in that formula automatically. So I can give out notebooks for answers to questions instead of the chocolate, I guess. So if I want to add a person here, I'll give you, I like trivia questions. So who did Taylor Swift write the song Bad Blood about? Yeah, you get a notebook. Okay, so we're going to add, yeah, so we're getting just what you needed to make your life complete. Okay, so we'll add so let's add Katy Perry. I like Katy Perry. I'm sorry. 5 number ones in one album, first person since Michael Jackson. So I'll add Katy Perry, if I could spell it right. Okay, and then suppose I say she made $50,000. Now what would happen to this number? It's going to go up by 50,000. Right. And then, okay, let's add how many units she sold, whatever. She's a good salesperson. Okay, now one more thing on this example. So you add data to a table and the formulas update, but you also add formulas like new columns to the right. So let's add a new column to the right. So let's say price. Notice the format is there. And suppose I want price is revenue divided by units. Do it by pointing. See, that says at revenue. What does that mean? Revenue in the current row divided by units. And now I want to copy it down. I don't have to. I hit enter. Copies down automatically. So that's one cool thing about tables. Okay, now how do I update a chart? And I could have plenty of charts based on a data set. So let's do an example of that. Let's see, where's the one I want? Copy of gas prices, yeah. Okay, so these are natural gas prices. I teach a lot in Houston, and boy, Houston's the only place unhappy about the oil price. Okay, I think 100,000 people basically will have lost their jobs or will by the end of the year. Although oil price is going up a bit. But Houston, really, healthcare, and anybody here from Houston, healthcare and oil prices are really key there. So let's suppose I have natural gas prices and I want to do a chart. So I'm going to make this a table. So I do Control-Shift right arrow, Control-Shift down arrow, that selects it, and then I do my Control-T, or not mine, but Microsoft's Control-T. Now let's put in a scatter chart. This is 2013 I'm using. It doesn't really matter though. Insert, scatter chart, and let's do that. Okay, so I have a nice chart there. Now if you click on a data set in a chart, this is how, if you don't know tables, you would change the range for a chart. See, if I had a new data point, I have to change that to row 35. I might have to do that 50 times, right? That would be horrible. But if I made the data table, I never have to do that again. So watch what happens here. So in other words, I'm going to add a new data point here. Oops. And it's fine if you just came in. I mean, everything's independent really of everything else. Okay, so 2005. And let's suppose the price, so now if I make the price be $45, which, let me scroll this down a little bit here. I made this so big you can't see it. Okay, so now a little bit further. Okay, so now if I go right here, the new points in the graph. And so that's really, I could have 100 graphs based on that data set. And so you can see how this would make the people work under you and yourselves more productive. Okay. An example I don't have time to go through today, but we worked for the Knicks. We do basketball analytics. They won 53 games the year we worked for them. The 2 years since, they haven't won 50 games total. Phil Jackson fired us. Okay, he didn't think he needed analytics, but the team's terrible. But they followed our lineup advice, and we had a spreadsheet with 1,500 formulas that was fed to the coaches to tell them what lineups were good. And so I had 1,500 formulas, and I would add the new data for each game after each game. And if I didn't make it a table, I would have had to change 1,500 formulas. I mean, I don't have time to show you the spreadsheet, but. So 2 more things on tables. Then we'll go on to a couple of, not pivot tables from scratch, that would be 2 or 3 hours, but a couple of things that most people don't know about pivot tables. Okay, so the one I want here is makeup, or table makeup temp. Okay. And this will feed into our next. So I first started writing these Microsoft Press books when my daughter was in 7th grade in 2003. And so these were her best friends. So her best friends were Emily and Ashley, who she now hates. So she said, if you have teenage daughters at one point, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, I think Emily's wonderful, but I mean, Ashley I sort of hate too. Okay, okay. But my daughter's in London working for BuzzFeed, and actually Colleen and Cece visited her this week. But so I made the data be the girls were selling makeup. Okay, so let me just show you 1 or 2 new things you can do with the table that we haven't shown you. So I'll make this a table, Control-T. So it's a table. So I go to Design tab, there's a totals row. See, I can add a totals row to the bottom. Now what's that 1891? That's how many data points, I don't care. But if I go to the next column, I can make this be, let's say, sum. And I can make this be sum, and that's cool. But now the coolest thing on this, if I go back up to the top, okay, I can filter. So I could say name, yeah, okay. Betsy's getting married this summer. My daughter's sad going to all these weddings now. Okay, so I'm going to put Emily in there, I'm sorry. Okay, Emily and Colleen. And then basically I'll say, I can filter the unselect all, I'll say the Midwest. And I'll say product, let's just say eyeliner. I don't know. Okay, so now look what happened. I see only the points that correspond to the filter, and the totals update for the filter. So if you go into a presentation, you can change it to whatever you want it to look like, and it looks really nice. And now another thing you could do if you want, see, suppose you wanted this data to go somewhere else. There's other ways to do it, but I could copy that, and if I throw it below the table, I would have that data to do something else with. Their advanced filter does that, but that's so fast. So the table feature really, one more thing on tables. Okay, good, only 10 minutes, that's great. Okay, yeah, question? If there's you right click, insert row, or insert column. Good question. Okay, but this is something I just learned a couple of months ago because it was screwing up.
More than one total row? So could you might do like standard deviation on one row? And
You'd have to do, I think you'd have to add multiple columns of it. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I haven't tried that though. Okay, sums with slicers. Okay, how many people have used slicers with pivot tables? Okay, and again, everybody, if you're old enough to remember, there's a commercial, a day without orange juice is like a day without sunshine. A pivot table without a slicer is like a pivot, well, we never have sun here anyway since we've been here. I looked at, but basically, slicers and pivot tables are great. I mean, anybody who sends you a pivot table without a slicer, you should teach them slicers in 30 seconds. People love slicers. But how many people have used tables have used slicers with tables? This is new to 2013. And this is actually more useful. Okay, but there's a little subtlety here that I didn't know about at least till I think last September. Okay, so I made up this example here. So we have every year, we have US sales and international sales from January through December. And I'm going to make this a table. I think I've already made it a table, which is good. That'd save us 30 seconds. See, design tab means it's a table. So now if I want to add up the total revenue, I can just add this all up, right? Okay. Now, if I do a filter here, you would expect that this number would change, right? I mean, I think that would be my first guess. It will not, sorry, a slicer or filter. Okay, a slicer. So I can do slicers. The slicers and tables started in 2013. In pivot tables in 2010, so it depends which version you have. Okay, but if I do insert, okay, I've got slicer here. Okay, so I want to just do year and type. In other words, I can slice on the year and the type. Okay, so now this is too big, but that's okay. So I can go like this. Okay, so now if I just pick, let's say 2011 and 2013 in the US, it should be adding up those rows, but it's not. Okay, and now how do I fix that? First, I want to make it go back, because I've got a former student who makes a lot of money consulting in Houston. He sets up dashboards for companies, and he uses the table feature with slicers all the time. But then his formulas weren't updating, so we had to figure out why. Okay, so now let's show you what you can do about this. There may be more than one solution. Okay, so now how many people have used the aggregate function? Fewer hands go up, okay? This is like buried in Excel starting in 2010. But if you type equals aggregate, sorry. Okay, now look what happens. You can do any, I want to do sum. Okay, now look at the next, this is the key. You can do ignore hidden rows. You can do ignore error values. You know when you do a VLOOKUP and there's NAs, you don't have, it'll ignore those. We used to do if error, we can do if error also, that's fine. But basically if I would do ignore hidden rows, and then basically pick the whole table. Okay, so now, see, now notice what that says. Table 1, January through December, add it all up. But now when I filter, it's going to work out. See, in other words, if I say 2012 and I say US, see, that number changed. And so that's, I didn't know that till like 4 months ago, but that makes those slicers really great. I mean, okay, so that's all we have time for on tables. So let's do two quick things on pivot tables, which I think most people don't know. Okay, so hopefully the people who raised their hand on get pivot data sort of know what I'm going to talk about here, copy of get pivot data. Okay. Okay, so what I have is data. Let's suppose you work for Intel, whose founder, Andy Groves, just died 2 days ago, I'm afraid. Okay, really one of the very important people in the technology revolution. Okay, so let's suppose I have every month I sell chip 1, 2, or 3, France, Canada, or the US. I've got revenue, budget, and variance. We'll come back to this table in a minute. Okay, but I created a pivot table, which I'm sure everybody knows how to do, right here. Let me make this bigger. Although we can't make it too big, I've got to see everything here. So what this shows me is each month, what did I sell of each product? And I didn't sell every product every month. Okay, now, pivot tables are hard to format, and basically, they usually don't look the way you want your reports to look. Okay, so now, what I want to do, let's make this old bold face. Okay, so what I would like to do here with get pivot data lets me get stuff out of a pivot table. And if the pivot table changes, I have that stuff. So basically, what I want to do, suppose I have only 3 products in 3 countries in 12 months of the year, but I might have 100 countries and 1,000 products. And this table, I would like to pull stuff out of this table externally to make up a nice chart, okay? And I could change the month of the year. I did a drop-down box to create the month of the year. And so over here, I would like to get from that table, no matter how messy it looks, basically, what I sold of every product in every country every month. And the beauty of get pivot data, suppose I add a new country, like we're going to start selling in Iran, whether you like it or not. Okay, and so we put Iran in there, it would move France, US, and Canada around, but the get pivot data doesn't care. Okay, so the way you should never type in to get pivot data, so how does it work? Okay, it's just so messy to type in, but if I'll just pick one here. Let's say April, I point to a cell in a pivot table. And you may have done this by accident, not knowing what you're doing. Now, sometimes you don't want this function to show up. I'll explain that. It can be a blessing or it can be a curse, okay? Because if you drag it down, it's the same thing. And so that you can turn it off. When somebody at one of my talks said, my boss will pay me $100 if I learn how to turn get pivot data off. So I hope she got her $100. Okay, so now what does this mean? In the pivot table, the sum of revenue that starts in A4, from the sum and revenue field, let's take the April data for chip 1 in France. Now, by itself, that's not really that useful. The key is if you sort of change this and copy down and across, then it'll pull the right stuff. So now what I need to do is edit this formula so I don't want the month to be April. I want it to be what's in this cell. And I need to $sign the row in the column. Now, you guys all know how to do that. But this is something, people who are new to Excel, they don't know how to $sign that well. Okay, now I guess I didn't select that. So I'm using F4 key to change this, but I must have not got this here. Yeah, it should cycle, but I mean, somehow I need it all $signed. There it is. Okay, but I think I haven't selected it. Now, product, I don't want it to be chip 1 because I want it to be where it says chip 1 in my little grid. So I want my product to be chip 1, and then I want to $sign the column. Because when I copied it across, so I use F4 key is the trick to change that. Now the country, I want it to be not France in quotes. I want it to be France there. So in other words, I point there, and then I want to $sign the 11, okay? And then I don't want to $sign the L. You guys all know how that works. Now if I do that, oops, what did I do wrong there? Let's. Oh yeah. Okay, I forgot to get rid of the quote. Okay, yeah, there's a quote. There's too many, there's all quotes there. Yeah, that's it. Okay, that's good. Now, if I copy that down and across, you'll get error messages because we didn't sell any chip 2 and 3 that month. Now, what's the easy way to fix that? If error, right, and put a 0 after the if error. Okay, so in other words, if I would do an if error there, and then I'd put comma 0 and copy that across because I don't want to see those error messages. So now if I just copy that across, and so that's totally dynamic. Pivot table, refresh the pivot table, this is refreshed. And I can format this nicely, I can do charts on this nicely. So you can take, the moral of this is, you can sort of take anything, any subset of data out of a pivot table, rearrange it, and then use it to make nice reports. Okay. And it's the key is not doing one get pivot data. How do you turn this thing off then? Well, there's a bunch of ways, but I'll go File, Option. See, what's the problem? Why do I want to turn it off sometimes? Yeah, because basically if I drag it down, let's just point to anything in here. And if I drag it down, it's always the same thing. In other words, sometimes you want to just drag the cell reference, right? So then all you do is, again, there's many ways, but File, Options, Formulas, where is that? Okay, there it is. And I turn it off. Then I always have to remember before I do this topic again to turn it back on. But then when I go there, see, it's now not showing Get Pivot Data. Okay, so one more thing in this example here. Okay, so, and this is one trick I didn't know till like a month ago, and I try and read all the books on Excel. I mean, I know most of the stuff, but I'll read a whole book to learn one new thing, okay, on this stuff. Okay, so I organized the pivot table differently. I did filters on product and country. Okay, now, you can suppose I want to know a pivot table for every country. I want to create in other words, I could do France, I could get a pivot table, US, I could do a pivot table, Canada, I could do a pivot table. There might be 100 countries. But could I at once get all 100 pivot tables if I had 100 countries? And the answer is yes. See, all I do is I click inside the pivot table. If you have 2010, I think it's called Options, but go to Analyze. Do you see this Options buttons on the left, which I never used in my life? But if you go there, do you see where it says Show Filter? I guess you can do Get Pivot Data there. But basically it says Show Report Filter Pages. And then you get in every worksheet a new pivot table. I mean, that's, like if I go there, let's just do it for a country. Now look, I have 3 different worksheets. I have a pivot table for each country created in a separate worksheet and named right. That's so easy, but I mean, it's buried. You'd never know. I never knew it was there until 3 months ago, and I do this stuff every day. So that's really useful. One more thing on pivot tables. How many people have created a pivot table where the data is not in one part, is in different worksheets? In other words, not in one place. Okay. So again, a lot more hands go up than I'm used to seeing, but everybody should know how to do this because data doesn't know it should be in one place. Okay, so let's go multiple PT. Okay, so what I have here is I have quarter sales, Asia, Europe, and USA of planes, trains, and cars. Okay, and see, so I have stuff in every worksheet. So I would like to make up a pivot table for this, and what's the key to this is basically, if you remember back the old days of how the pivot table wizard looked, okay, this wouldn't have been hard to do. But if you do Alt key, D, and P key, you can bring up multiple ranges. Okay, so I'm hitting Alt D and P, Alt D, P. And you can add that to the ribbon. I don't have time to show that, but if you go File, Options, and the ribbon, and you say basically add a quick access, you can add to your quick access toolbar. Do quick access toolbar, File, Options, add commands not on ribbon, you can add this Alt D, P thing. But so multiple consolidation ranges is right there. So that's very straightforward. So you just need to know Alt D, P if you haven't done this. It's very simple from that point. So next is, I don't worry about the page fields. That's a little, one page field is usually fine. I don't want to get into that. But if I select this here, that's the first data set, add. Now I go to the second data set, add. Now I'll go to the third data set. I think it's going to learn the pattern. See, it's in the same place, add. And I go to the fourth data set, add. I'm done. Well, I want to, yeah, I could use a 3D formula. I could do it that way. That's fine. But then it doesn't, yeah, I mean, that would be fine, but now I can slice it. See, I mean, that's what I like about this. In other words, see, if I would insert a slicer, which you guys mainly know for pivot tables, if I do slicer, see, it's row and column, and now it'll show what's in the row and column. And then I mean, and that could be in multiple workbooks the same way. So I mean, if you have data, like if you had a worksheet for every month of the year, okay, I mean would really be quite useful. Okay, so now we'll get to these functions. Okay, that's pretty good for 23 minutes. Oh, question? Well, Power Pivot, I mean, I'll admit I'm not the world's greatest expert on it, but I think you want to do, if your data is not that big, do you want a pivot table or do you want a Power Pivot analysis? I mean, how many people use Power Pivot a lot? Okay, how many people use pivot tables? Okay, and really about the same number of hands. Okay, but I mean, for your basic financial analyst, you are the more advanced people. You guys know Power Pivot. I mean, I would never get that many hands going up at a place for the people I teach about Power Pivot. But I think you'd agree that almost everybody who does you'd call an analyst in any field in your company or your organization, they know pivot tables. Okay, so I mean, if it's a lot of data you want it in Power Pivot, and it just depends. Like if you worked for Medicare, you'd have to use Power Pivot or Walmart because you're getting the million row limit. I mean, when I go to most places, the million row limit is not an issue. But for a lot of you guys, it is. It depends where you work. I mean, if you work for small town, I mean, you're not going to have millions of rows. But I mean, you definitely can use Power Pivot, but it's much harder to learn. You have to learn that DAX language. And I mean, that's not, and that obviously the people here are the people who sort of know that stuff and are into that stuff. But I would say 90% of the people at a Fortune 500 company who use Excel, they're not going to know how to do Power Pivot. Maybe in the future that's going to change. Okay, I think part of the purpose of this conference is to make that change. But basically, if I have like small data sets and I want to summarize them, I don't think you need to go into Power Pivot. It just depends. I mean, if your things are crashing like crazy, then you want to go into Power Pivot, obviously. Okay, so I got time. Hopefully I can do offset and indirect function. I'd be thrilled if we got that far. I think I'll go right to 12:20 because there's the lunch coming up, and then we'll do questions if anybody has any, and I'll be glad to talk outside to any. We can stay in the room. There's nothing here till 1. Okay, so let's talk about the offset function. I think I have a great example of why you want to learn this function. Okay, so let's talk offset. Oh, I didn't have the example. Okay, the example temp. 1 second. Okay, so offset example. No, it's all here. Okay, so let's explain how the offset function works. And it lets you do a ton of things. When people send me questions on Excel, I'd say over half the time the answer to their question involves offset function, combining functions, and if statements. If statements, I mean, we all know if statements, but writing a clever if statement combined with other functions is sort of like an if with a countif, an if with a text function. Most people don't realize you can combine things, and that's what separates the really good Excel people from the medium Excel people. And I mean, in my classes, I really try and get people to be good at combining stuff. Okay, but let's look, every function has a syntax. So what's the syntax of offset? So offset is you have a cell reference, and then from that cell, you move a certain number of rows. -1 means up 1 row, +1 means down 1 row, and then you move 0 means don't move at all. Then you have a certain number of columns you move. -1 means move 1 column to the left, +1 means 1 column to the right, 0 means stay in the column you're in. Okay, and so then that'll take you to a new cell. What is your reward for being in the new cell? You pick out a range. You need a height and a width. And this sounds totally useless at this point if you've never seen it, but that's okay. I'll make you stand up and cheer for offset in 5 minutes with the example I show you. Okay, which is a real example. And then height would be the number of rows in the range you pick off, and width would be the number of columns. Okay, so that doesn't sound very useful if you've not seen it before. But so let's look at an example of an offset formula and try and show why it gives the result it does. Usually we combine offset with other functions like sum or average. But let's take a look at this function. And nobody would ever have written this function except to try and teach you offset because it's like useless. It's just a pedagogical example. But if you understand this example, and I'll do one more, then you'll understand the really practical problem, which I can make a 30-hour problem into a 2-minute problem. Just tell your boss you're working on it. Okay. Otherwise, you guys are really good. They give you all the problems to solve, right? I had one guy at 3M who's really the best guy at solver. You ever go to Cracker Barrel and play the peg game? He wrote a solver to solve the peg game. One thing in the middle. I have no idea how it works, but it works. He'd always end up with 1 peg in the center. I've never ended up with 1 peg in the center. Okay. So let's look at this formula. So I start in B7, and then -1 means go up 1 row. +1, sorry, B7 was here, I'm sorry. Go up 1 row. +1 means over 1 column. Stop, that's where you are. That's the upper left-hand corner of a range. How big is it? 2 rows and 1 column. What is that? It's these 2 cells. What do you get when you add them up? You get 8. Let's do one more real quick. So I do E16, and then -2, Okay, sorry, right here is E16. -2 up 2, 3 to the left, 1, 2, 3. That's the array where it starts, and it's 2 rows and 3 columns. Add up the yellow, the orange on the projector now, but you get 24. Now you may say, what use is that? And that's fine, but as long as you understand why it's 8 and 24, you're good. Okay, now let me show you my example. I could give you 6, just other problems I can solve with offset. Take a 20 by 20 array, and you want the numbers and the diagonals to go in one row. You should try this yourself. And then if you have a column and you want to reverse so the last entry becomes the top entry. Try and do those with offset yourself. That would be good practice that you understand offset. I mean, I just don't have time. I do them in class, but we don't have time today. Okay, but here's my great example. And it's a real example based on somebody who worked for Pfizer. Okay, and I never knew offset until this problem popped up. So the problem was drugs go through 3 phases of development. And so he had 5,000 different columns of numbers for drugs. Each drug took a different number of months, and he had the cost for each month. And he's supposed to figure out the cost for each phase. So phase 1 would be, for drug 1, would be these 2 rows. For the next drug, it would be the first 3 rows. Okay? And then for the next drug, it would be the 9 rows. Okay, like that. Okay. And now the next, for phase 2, drug 1, it would be these 2 rows, it would be these 8 rows. And if you want to see if you're good at Excel, try and do this formatting, automated with conditional formatting. It's not that hard. And this would be 5 rows. And then let me just do one more on phase 3 to save a little time here. So phase 3 for the first drug would be 2 months. Okay, so, all right. So now the problem the guy had was, okay, he has 5,000 columns, and he has to, like in this column, for phase 1, he adds up rows 10 and 11. In this column, he adds up rows 10 through 12. In this column, he adds up rows 10 through 18. So he has to write 15,000 formulas, or she has to write 15,000 formulas. And you could be the best employee in the world. You'd make a mistake, and you'd hate your job, okay? Because, I mean, you got to do 15,000 formulas at 30 seconds a formula. Maybe that's 7,500 minutes, and then you want to proof it. That's 15 hours, let's say. Okay, that's a long time. Okay, now, if I had to sum up the key to be good at Excel, let's see if anybody knows where this phrase is from. There's a method to his madness. Anybody know if you studied literature? What famous work of literature? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Very good. You get a notebook. I'm sorry. Or you can have chocolate or a notebook. Okay, you can have your pick. You can have a piece of chocolate too for a minute. Okay, here you go. All right. So, but what does that have to do with Excel? A method to his madness. Finding a pattern in the spreadsheet, and if you see a pattern in the spreadsheet and you know functions, you can totally do just about anything. Okay, so like how do I do phase 1 here? Well, you'd say I add up the first 2 rows here, I add up the first 3 rows here, because there's a 2 and a 3. That's not the way to think of it. How many rows do I add up for phase 1? Whatever's in row 1 of the column. See, that's the way you have to think to be good at Excel. Most of you, I'm sure, to that point. But not everybody at your company is. Okay, see, so if you look at the formula, a great function in Excel is formula text starting in 2013. I can just pull this out. Now, why would that give the phase 1 cost? Because I would start in row 10 of the current column, not move at all, and how many rows do I select? Whatever's in row 1. See, that formula copied across 5,000 columns, and every column can pick off a different number of rows. Now, how do I do phase 2? Well, if you're thinking about this, the difference is you don't start in row 10. You start in, see, the red starts in a different row in every column. You have to move down the length of phase 1. That's the pattern. See, you move down here 2 rows, you move down here 3 rows, you move down here 9 rows. So you start in row 10, you move down the length of phase 1, you don't move any columns because you'll always be in the right column, and you add up how many rows, whatever's in row 2. In phase 3, I want to save a little time. You move down the length of phases 1 and 2. But you can take those 3 formulas, copy them across 16,000 columns in Excel, which is the maximum, and you could have 48,000 calculations in under a minute if you knew what you're doing. Otherwise, how do you do this? You go through each column and figure out what rows correspond to each phase, and that's horrible. I mean, this is why it's so important to make sure everybody who works in your company who does stuff knows all the functions. I mean, so we got time for one more here. Indirect function. Okay, and I mean, I try and go back and forth on what's harder, indirect or offset. I actually think offset's a little harder, but indirect, unless you were brought up as a programmer, is not the way you think. Okay, but it's really easy. Okay, so let's go to indirect here. Okay, blank spreadsheet. Okay, so now let me do something really simple, and again, it'll sound really stupid, but if you understand this, you'll understand everything. Okay, so I'm going to put this here. All right, suppose I have a cell with a 6, and B4 contains a 6. How can I refer to that? I can point to that cell. If you didn't know that, you'd get fired in 2 days if you were an analyst, right? I mean, I think everybody knows how to do that. Okay, now what's the key to the indirect function? When you see the word indirect in their cell references and parentheses behind it, what that's telling you is you should replace the cell reference by the contents of the cell. And just follow that rule. In other words, you see B4, you see D4, what goes in the formula, really, that the cell reference gets replaced by what's in it. Now, what's the use of that? You'll see in a couple of minutes, you can create sheet and cell references if they have a pattern really easily. And I'll show you how to take any stuff. You have a massive multi-worksheet workbook. It doesn't work between workbooks. A massive workbook with many worksheets. You could take any subset of worksheets and any subset of cells and put it in one place. And then I'll show you a trick with range names based on that. Okay, so now let's just do indirect A4. See, A4 is a cell, so you should replace A4 by what's in there, and that's B4. So that should be the same as equal B4, right? That should be a 6. Now that seems incredibly stupid in this example, and it is. Okay, but basically, what does it mean for a person to be indirect? They don't say what they mean, they beat around the bush. Bad quality in a person, good quality in a function, as you'll see in a minute. Okay. Yeah, that's right. If anybody was a programmer, they know how to, this is second nature. If you're not a programmer, it doesn't make much sense until you see an example. So I got a couple of examples, and this timing is working perfectly. I'm surprised. Okay, so I want to go here. Okay, so I've got a spreadsheet here. I have like Latin America, North America, Asia, Africa, and Europe, sales of cars, trucks, and planes, and I want to create a summary. Okay, so in other words, I have a multiple worksheet workbook. The key is here, I know the names of the worksheets. Now, I can show you how to get the names of the worksheets. There's a really easy way that I didn't know till about a year ago. But basically, the key to using indirect, if you have like a 100 worksheet workbook, you probably don't know the names of the worksheets. But there is an easy way to get that, which I'm going to show you and in a second here. Okay, so now here I know the names of the worksheets because they're just the continents. So what you can do is list any subset of worksheets, if you know the names of the worksheets, here we do, and any subset of cells, and then you can have a formula you copy down and across. Let's take a look at this. And again, the key is the dollar signs. Okay. But let's take a, see, this is what I can build up by copying that formula, you'll see in a moment, is every worksheet name with the cells E7, E8, and E9, which is where the cars, the trucks, and the planes were. So now, again, what do you do here? E6, what's in E6? Latin America. So remember, you replace the cell reference by the contents of the cell. So that becomes equals Latin America. Now, I'll do it without the equal sign. So it would start equals Latin America, capitals. Latin America. Now, I use the concatenate, which basically combines stuff. You need to put the exclamation point in quotes because all these formulas say sheet 1, exclamation point. Why? Is Excel excited? I have no idea. I don't think it's that exciting. But you need the exclamation point. You need it. Okay, and it's text, so you add that there. And then C7 is the cell address, which would be E7. And so that's going to be this. Which, now, if you want to see really how it works, okay, I can go here and I can go formulas, evaluate formula. And you can watch this. This gives you the steps. So E6 is Latin America. There's your exclamation point, and there's your E7. And that's the answer. And when you copy that down and across, like if you go here, then it's basically Europe. Tragedy there, unfortunately, yesterday. And then we would go E9. So that's Europe E9. So if I know the names of the worksheets, I can take any subset of worksheets and any subset of cells, and I can move it wherever I want it. That's incredibly, I'll give you an example. So I teach these courses at NavAir in Lexington Park, Maryland. So one person there, she had 200 worksheets, and she had to take what's in cell E1 from every fourth worksheet. And she was manually cutting and pasting 50 numbers. Yeah, question? Oh, yeah, yeah, you could do that. Yeah, that you could do. Yeah, that would be fine. Okay, so let me show you two more examples of indirect, and that should be, let's see if I have, that should get us to where we want to go. Okay, so I'll get, now knowing the worksheet names would be real, well, let's get to how to get the worksheet names right now. Okay, so, because we should talk a little bit about array formulas here. Okay, but so this is a very simple example. I have 3 worksheets here, and I want to get the names, and they're Bob, Alan, and Jill, obviously. But basically, if I had 200 worksheets and I want to get the names of all of them, how would I do that? Okay, so the steps to doing this, okay, it's going to involve an array formula, which I'll briefly introduce. You go to define names, I'm assuming you know range names, and then you go create a name, and basically what name do you use, it doesn't matter, call it worksheet. But the key is you have to type this crazy thing in. Type equal get dot workbook left parentheses 1 right parentheses, and that's the key. And then if you select a horizontal array that equals the number of worksheets in the workbook, you might say, how do you know how many worksheets? There's a function for that now. In 2013, there's a function sheets. So that would tell you how many worksheets. So then you need this here to know how many, it's got to be a horizontal array, and then you type equal this name that you gave it worksheet and do Control-Shift-Enter. Now that won't quite give you the names of the worksheets, but it'll give you the whole path. But then you can use text functions to pull it out, as I'll show you. But let me just give you a quick example of array formulas. Suppose you have a list of names. So we've got what, Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, Britney Spears was in the news last week. Look it up if you don't know why. Paris Hilton is a total idiot. Okay, so now suppose I want to transpose those names. Okay, so if I would do copy, I can do right click, and there's the transpose thing there, right there. Now what's wrong with that? If I change the names up there, they don't change down there. Okay, so a way to solve that, there's a function called transpose. So if I would type if I want to transpose those, I need 4 cells in a column. So I would do equals transpose, and I'd select these guys. And the key is you have to first select the range, and then you hit put in the formula, then Control-Shift-Enter. Now look here, if you try and delete Paris Hilton, as you should, you can't do it because there's a curly bracket there. But I can take care of Paris Hilton. Now I'll go to somebody worse, Kim Kardashian. Okay, so now in the second thing, it changed to Kim Kardashian, okay, from Paris Hilton, but it didn't change up there. So that functions better with that Control-Shift-Enter. Okay, I think then that's a simple example of an array formula. And there's a book, Control plus Shift plus Enter, which is really good on array formulas, actually by a guy who lives right here, near here in Seattle, Mike McGurvin, I believe his name is. Okay, but how can I use the trick that I just talked about here? So I would go, and then one more example, I think that'll work out perfect. Okay, so I would go formulas, and you can rate range names many ways. I don't have time for that today except for this one. So I do define, by the way, if you create range names, they don't update automatically like the table unless you make them dynamic ranges. That's why the table feature we showed you is so important. You can make ranges update, and the way you do that is with offset. I didn't have time to teach that today, but that's very important. Yeah, so yeah, you do that, but if it's chronological. So I want to call this name worksheet. And then the crazy thing here, I've got to go, what is it, get dot workbook 1, which, I mean, I don't know how any, I mean, I read this in a book or else I wouldn't know it. Okay, and it's just got to be that way. Okay, now there are 3 sheets, so I select 3 cells, I do equal worksheet, and I do Control-Shift-Enter. Now let's widen the columns. I just select up here, I can widen the columns. Okay, now you can see I'm getting a lot of junk that I don't care about. If I had 200 worksheets, though, it's easy to fix. I just want everything to the right of the bracket. So quickly with text functions, so I can find the bracket. So I do equals find, and I put the bracket here in, that's the wrong bracket. There it is. I say in this cell, starting at the first character, and then I take everything to the right of that. Sorry, I didn't get that copied over. Okay, that's too wide. I don't want it that wide. Okay, so now, real quickly, So I would do a right function, take everything from the right, this cell, take the whole length, so that's the wrong cell. So take right here, take the whole length of this cell, that's how many characters minus here, that should give me the sheet name. So that would give me 200 sheet names, and that took me like 2 minutes once I know how to do it. So then I could use the trick on the indirect. I've got the sheet names. I pick any subset of sheets, any subset of cells, do the trick I did last example. I can move this stuff around. It's just great. Okay, so one last thing here, and then 44 minutes, and this will be perfect. This should take 4 minutes here. Okay, so indirect with range names. So you can name, I'll show you quickly how to name stuff. Okay, then we'll be done. Indirect range temp. Okay. So let's suppose we have sales of Windows, Office, and Xbox every quarter of the year, every month of the year. This data has no structure. I can't do any calculations. I want to make it into a table, right? In other words, I would like to know for every time period, I could have 1,000 products. What did I sell of each product? Okay, now what's an easy way to do this? I name this range here quarter one, just to show you how I would do that. So I click on quarter one, it's there. But like just to name a range, just to show you if you've not seen it. So I could select these cells and call it the Hyatt. Okay, and then basically whenever I use Hyatt in a formula, it means those cells. So there are other ways you can do it based on text, but don't have time. Okay, so just picture in your mind there were 1,000 products. Okay, so I have this bright idea, and I've been asked this question many times because people would try it and it doesn't work. I should do a VLOOKUP based on the product name, a VLOOKUP false, and then the table range should be the quarter. And then the second column will give me the answer, but it won't work, but I'll fix it. So do VLOOKUP, and the lookup would be based on the range name, and then basically, oh, that's the product. No, that's the product. Here's the range name. Okay, so, oh, I've got to do my $sign, sorry. So in other words, if I want to do H16, again, I use F4, I've got a $sign, the 16. And then I would say this would be the table range, because that's quarter one, that's what's up here. And then I would $sign my friend the G, okay, because I want the 17 to change. And I'd say second column, comma, false. And logically, that should give me quarter one Office is 63. It does not work. And the reason it doesn't work is because the G17, it doesn't know that's a range name. It thinks it's text. So all I have to do is use the magic words indirect. So in other words, if I put magic word, in other words, if I do this, it knows what's the contents of G17. It's the range. When you put that in front of it, so you can copy formulas involving ranges, which is really useful. See, there's the 63. Okay, so that worked out 48 minutes, so I think that's perfect. So any questions? No questions? No, you can ask me afterwards. And again, we have business cards here if you want one, and you can fight over the notebooks. Okay.